So welcome everyone. My name is Paul Wallace from Pulse Secure. I'm going to talk today about secure access and the difference of what we talk about when we talk about security, perimeters, and so on. So let's move straight into this. Let's first of all start by asking, what do we mean by secure access? Because in security, we often talk about perimeters. So one of the things that we think about is where is your perimeter in this? Now, we can think of this in several different layers, okay? So maybe we think of the first perimeter at the users themselves. One thing we know is that the users are probably the weakest link in the whole process. There's not been any kind of security breach without a person being involved somewhere before or after. Often we're the agent ourselves, okay? So where do we draw the line? Where is the perimeter there? Is it the people? We could impose multi-factor authentication. We could have all kinds of technologies at the front end. Is it the devices? Do we think about device management, compliance? How do we manage the particular devices and the interaction with those users? The other place we think about the perimeter is in the network. And this could be, the network is wherever your network is. It could be in the cloud, it could be a private virtualization, it could be within an individual switch. But again, we need to think about the relationship between the networks, the devices and the people, but also, could we think of the perimeter at an even closer level? If we draw the perimeter right at the application, there's actually, in fact, the final point. That is where the data is, and the more valuable the data, the more transactions an application has, the more attractive it is, okay? So we like to think about each of these layers, but how they interact. And so one of the things that we believe at Pulse Secure is that security is important, control is important, but really what matters to users is the access. The access allows the users to access the data they're looking for to complete their roles, build shopping carts, to make transactions within an organization. The devices are a key part of this as well, and I can build security solutions around the people, the users, and the applications, and many times I have cloud infrastructure, which has some kind of security infrastructure built in there. But what we find with our customers is that an individual solution for each of those silos doesn't work unless they all work together. So secure access is what we think of as making sure that any user can get to the data that they have a right to access, okay? But also we need to make sure that the access is quick, is reliable, is secure, okay? Because simply having all of these barriers, different layers, different security tools and so on, all in the way, this can actually slow down access, make it more difficult, and ultimately, many different tools have a problem for user access, usability, and user experience. So if you remember, in the good old days, security was really easy. 2-tier, 3-tier servers. I had PCs, or green screen terminals if you like. I had a data center. You knew where the users were, you knew where the servers were, you knew where the application was, and you had a secure connection in between. It was really easy. But now, I've got problems with many different devices, many different networks. I, as an individual, I have phones, I have laptops, I have all kinds of things. At home, I have heating sensors, IoT. I, as an individual, have a lot of these devices there as well. I access a number of different applications, services, clouds. The system that controls the heating in my house is an IoT system. It's a completely autonomous thing, and I can control it from my phone. So the challenge now is from our point of view, from us as users of all this technology, is how do I ensure the compliance of all the pieces of the chain? How do I have visibility across each of the pieces? Because I need to make sure that there are no gaps between all those different silos. I need to make sure that all of these connections are available all the time. Reliability, system integrity, these are all key aspects to security in our view as well, okay? Because denial of service ultimately is a lack of availability, and a number of different things. It could be intentional denial of service, or it could be accidental. When somebody digs through a cable, that's just the same as a denial of service. So how do you link all these things together? So these are the challenges that we hear from our customers. The first of these, visibility. One of the things they find is that they've got so many different devices, so many different networks, so many different tools, they have gaps between them. And it's possible, as I'll show you in a minute, for there to be little gaps where devices can inject malware, can log into the system, and users can move from one system to the other without being tracked. And IoT, of course, is a challenge because you now have not just 1,000 users on a network, not just 10,000 devices on a network, you have 1 million devices out there connected to your network, providing services to all of your customers. Compliance. Apple released a whole new range of iPhones and watches and so on the other day. Well, the more devices that I have, the more ways to extract data from a system. And the more ways there are to extract data, the more exploits there are for this. Now, it's really difficult to be able to lock down on a device level or a network level each of these things unless you have some integrated policy for all these. But if I have different tools, and I as an individual have to think there's a different tool for this gateway, another tool for this layer in the network, and so on. Single sign-on is a simple thing, but in fact there's more to it than that because each of these layers must themselves authenticate between each other. Okay? And so user experience is a real challenge with this type of system if I have too many devices and tools in the way. And again, I mentioned about the idea of integrity and availability. There used to be an idea, and we'll talk a bit about load balancers as well in a moment. There used to be this idea that a load balancer would improve the performance and the reliability of something, but we're finding that actually that can play a key part in the security of an application as well, and the way in which different paths, access paths, can be controlled and locked down for performance. So here's a couple of examples of those challenges. Before, I used to have different domains, different user types, different networks, and I had different policies across them all. What we need to do is we need to work out how we can implement one policy and apply that across each domain as a common set of policies. I mentioned earlier about the challenge of gaps between tools and so on. If I've got visibility on one network and another tool to look at a different network, how do I put those together? How do I not just understand what is within each network, but actually what is common to the networks, and actually how do I actually do end-to-end? Where is the traffic going? What is the communication between those networks as well? And this is why we think building that idea of authenticated connection between these layers, secure connections, and actually having full visibility is important. Scaling is another thing. 1,000 users, 10,000 devices, 1 million endpoints. These are real challenges. Each of these systems resides on different networks. They move between networks as well. Well, you need a way of actually building applications, scaling them up, but also scaling the connections as well. And so we think there's a role to play within the way in which applications connect with their endpoints and deliver applications to the endpoints as well. And finally, on this point, the traditional idea of a data center being a static thing has long gone. These days, there's not even a single cloud people work with. People are looking to deploy different applications, different tools on different clouds to suit their user bases, their customers as well. And so we see increasingly not just different types of public cloud, but actually different types of applications and software as a service. All of these need to benefit from the same kind of orchestration and policy across everything. So I've picked a couple of examples here, no offense to anyone in the room, but if I take the idea of having a particular type of network, maybe a VPN, a particular type of network access control, and a particular type of load balancer or ADC, if they don't all match together, it costs more. Too many tool sets, too little expertise. It's difficult to follow trends. It's difficult to move that with your own strategy. And as you know, if you have a system which is best of breed today, then next week, next month, it's going to be different. I think somebody once says technology has the shelf life of a banana, and that's still true. So how do we connect those together? How do we actually make sure we fill the blind spots, and how do we make sure that the common set of tools and common policies work? Well, Pulse Secure, we have a set of tools which allow you to connect these. We don't provide all the tools in the network. It's simply a question of how we link them together. And we have one or two policy tools, Pulse One, which allows you visibility of policies and allows you to provision them to devices, users, and networks. And we have a range of partnerships, and I'll come on to some partnerships in a moment of how we work with Fortinet, I've called up, Juniper we also have, Checkpoint and a number of others within switches, but also within cloud authentication, people like Okta, Ping, and so on as well. It's how do you orchestrate these together. And through all this, we've got about 20,000 customers in total, 18 million endpoints, and about 800 employees these days. So we've got a track record, and recently we've also made a couple of acquisitions which actually allow us to extend that network so we can actually start to build better tools and better orchestration across that. So I'll just move on now and think about that thing we talked about earlier. What do we mean by end-to-end secure access? Because if you recall, the perimeter is something which is one of those things, it depends who you think of. Is your perimeter where the users are? Is it where your devices are? Is it about the networks, and which network? And is it about the applications? Now, if you look at all these individual tools, I need to be able to forge a way through each of those to make sure that when I as a user connect, I've actually connected through whichever path I come through to. Whether I'm looking, but I can choose as an organization, do I focus my resources on securing where the data is, or do I focus it on device compliance? But for me, what I want to do is, when I connect, I want to be able to make sure that I've actually got a connection right through. And this is the key to it, because at each of these layers, you may choose different types of authentication, device management, network access control, and all these will work with all the different vendors you have for different parts of the network. Down to the application, load balancers and ADCs, we believe these form a key part of the security infrastructure orchestration, because in fact, once you've actually made that connection, I've actually reached down to where my application is and I'm trying to get to my data. Actually, I need to make sure that gets to me quickly, securely, and reliably wherever I am. So if I move as an individual, I can actually move to a different network. I can roam from one network to another over Wi-Fi, corporate LAN, and so on. Actually, I still need to make sure I have consistent access to that data. And it's all about identifying that channel, orchestrating the policies, and making sure I understand what's happening there. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's really important to us that we manage to retain your existing investments. So it's got to be about standards. It's got to be about open frameworks. We've got a range of proofs of how we integrate with different people, how we share the policies and project them across to different types of networks and technologies. But one of the examples that we actually talk about here is visibility. How do we solve visibility? Well, there's two aspects to this, if you remember. On the one hand, it's where are your devices, where are your users, what are they doing, and starting to provision the different policies for them. If I have a user, maybe I need to be able to provision that to 2 or 3 different devices into the network and into the application. On the other hand, I need to know where the traffic is going. And so this other chart here I've got is not about an individual, but it's about the end-to-end. And by end-to-end, we mean from the endpoint all the way through to the server. Because now you can start to see where the traffic is, you can start to see where the choke points are, you can start to understand how these things link together. So visibility, whichever cloud you're in, whichever location you're coming from, but also understanding which, as an individual, which devices and policies are in progress. From a global connectivity point of view, of course, one of the other areas in which this makes sense is that by having, in this case I've got a VPN, and I might have disconnected regions, a US one, an EMEA one, and Asia Pacific. One of the things that we're asked for often is how do we actually make sure we convert that to a single VPN service? And so you've now started to integrate a number of different services so that in fact you're now able to say, wherever I am, even if I'm based in EMEA, even if I go through to the US, if I'm in the US, it'll actually recognize that I'm closer to the US, make sure my policies are provisioned, and actually give me that's the better service. Because I don't want to have to come back all the way across the world to come back to EMEA. I want to connect and make sure that's automatically connecting me in the best possible way. Better user experience, universal security. Another example that we see of trying to make sure we connect the dots here, this is a partnership we have with Fortinet, but in fact, as I said, we have similar things we're able to work with Juniper, Checkpoint, and others. One of in fact, the previous presentation, Juniper talked about using SkyATP, using threat intelligence and actually understanding what's going on. In a similar sort of situation here, okay, this is a different solution, but in fact, if you've got a solution where you're understanding, monitoring the network, and identifying some compromised devices, then what you can do here is you can start to say, well, let me quarantine that particular device and so on, capture it within a given network and so on. But one of the things that we can do with this is we can actually take that information and I can come back out to the outer layers, to the devices and the users, and I can enforce a single sign out of that user on all devices, on all networks. And what that means is that if that user or that device tries to move across to a different network to make another attempt to come in, actually I've pushed it back another section. So I'm no longer manage it within the network layer, I'm now pushing it back 2 layers, so I'm now back all the way back to the individual. Now whether that user comes in, uses those credentials on different devices, different networks, I've actually pushed it all the way back. And so it's a much stronger way to do this. And this type of integration allows you to link those layers together so you've got a much more integrated and orchestrated secure access. And ultimately, this reduces the mean time to respond, because whereas before I've captured or quarantined it within a network, actually now, for future attempts, I don't even have to track it. Okay? It's not based on an ACK, it's actually based on a user. It's right back, and all the systems now within that infrastructure can understand this is quarantined device, quarantined user, and they better call the call center. If you remember, the next level down, we're talking about the application. Now, one of the things that we find is that applications are their own source of problems. Because even if I'm a known user, on a known device, on a known network, and I start to come in, I can start to do bad things. Okay? We've often seen examples of employees or in the CIA, people accessing information they shouldn't have done. What we can do is we can start doing very deep authorization and control right at the very heart of the application, on the application itself. So I know who you are, I know your device, but actually I can now start to think about, well, why are you doing this from that location on a weekend? And furthermore, maybe I can take additional measures. Instead of just saying block, I can actually start to say, what other actions can I take? Maybe I'll say, I'll give you a lower security version of this particular document, or maybe I can simply post the document to a secure email and say, I'm not going to send it to you over the internet, I'm going to send it to your inside email, okay? So I can do connection back to the device. I can query the device, I can query the user, I can query other things. I can also have policies which will come in to enforce use of particular SSL, TLS right the way across the connection. I can do smart caching, and I can also customize the workflow and the behavior. So I can actually say, okay, so you've come all this way in, but maybe for this particular document, I need an extra set of challenges going on. So you can actually change the behavior of an application to suit the business rules you've got in place. And finally, it's also possible to put in a web application firewall for things like cross-site scripting and so on at the very, very low-level access, layer 7 access challenges as well. So this defense of the application, of the network, the device and the user is all very well, but how do I scale this up? And this is one of the things that we've started to release recently, that if I put in all of those tools, I've got to track a lot of different resources and so on. And particularly in the case of applications, where I've got large surges of traffic, IoT systems doing mass logins and or e-commerce platforms that are taking vast surges for people buying tickets. Well, one of the things that we find is that our customers are looking for ways to provision the services much quicker than they had before. So one of the tools that we've got is this idea of being able to dynamically allocate resources, which gets for much better capacity planning within the security infrastructure and the application infrastructure as well. And by being able to pre-provision the policy, the baseline policies, and then layer on top of them additional policies using the central policy managers we have, actually lets you move to a very different economic and essentially cloud economics. I can now essentially build out applications, I can build out security policies, and actually I can much better planning as those resources move between different applications as well. And I've actually got here an example where we've got one customer has actually scaled this to thousands of applications, 300,000 users, 100 countries, 400 offices. And so this is a proof point. This is a global IT organization where they had a number of different challenges. One of the things they needed to do was lock down the unified communications. They were using a third-party unified communications platform, scales to very large numbers. But the challenge they had is actually how you lock down that, how you make sure it provides for continuous availability to global access. So they've used our tools to do that. But the other challenge they had was how do you actually enforce device compliance across 300,000 or 400,000 users? Because you've got a challenge now where you have constant change, constant updates and movement between organizations. The big organizations are changing every day. And so we've actually helped them build tools that can provision and understand and monitor in real time devices wherever they happen to be as their users migrate around to different programs and projects to actually take control of that. And finally, big organizations have thousands of applications. And one of the key challenges they had was actually, with all this, the policy management, how do they actually provision thousands of applications quickly? And one of the things we were able to do is show them that with this change in the way in which they manage those applications, they can roll out applications about 10 times faster than they could before. And the applications themselves performed and delivered much better than they had before. So this idea of having a global organization, multiple layers of security, but still managing to have continuous access and high performance access without slowing down the pace of development and IT deployment was a really powerful tool for them. And so we're very pleased that we've been able to build this for them as well, working across different clouds. And now they're working with their clients on this as well. And one little touch to this, part of the reason we're able to do that and extend that is that whereas before, Pulse Secure was focused primarily around networks and users and devices, about a year ago, this is my part of the organization, acquired the Brocade VADC assets about a year ago. So moving from just networks, users, and devices, we're now in a position where we can actually integrate the rest of the story about applications, the data, and the user experience as part of the overall solution. And so that draws it to an end. I'll cut it there because I think we're short of time. But I think there's an opportunity here for people to think about what it is their users are trying to do, what policies they're trying to manage, what is the rate of change within the users, the devices, and the infrastructure as well to manage all of those, and having something which will integrate with your existing tool sets. So you've got now a tool set which you can now manage today and take with you into wherever technology takes you in the future.